Good afternoon. I'm Kay Jacobson, a history coordinator for the Ramsey County Library System, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the popular ongoing presidential series created by historian J.B. Andersen. Today's talk is the second in the series focusing on um, Abraham Lincoln, and our program today is sponsored by the Ramsey County Libraries and Osher Lifelong Learning Institute of the University of Minnesota. We're deeply grateful to both organizations for their support in bringing these talks to you, our audience. And now we're going to turn things over to our speaker, J.B. Andersen, who's been a longtime historian, worked for the University of Minnesota for 25 years, and just, totally into presidents. And I think we've all appreciated that. Over to you, JB.
Thank you. Couple of things I'd like to talk to you about just briefly. One is I do look away from the camera occasionally. I have a keyboard down here and I need to advance slides or go back a slide or two. And so I do look away from the audience occasionally. There's been a couple of concerns about that. So I do care about you all, and we'll do the best to keep looking into the camera. Um, Also, there were two questions last week. I lost track of one of them, the sheet of paper. So the one I'm going to answer, if you're the person that submitted a question last week and it isn't answered, please send it to me again. You can put it in the Q&A box at the bottom. Good. Thanks for the extra help and understanding. Also, my allergies are super acting up, so if my voice sounds funny, that's the reason. I may sneeze, and I have both hot water and cold soda drink that I might take occasionally. So thanks for understanding. And let's take a look at the question from last week. It concerned a poem about homosexuality that or gayness that Lincoln wrote when he was 20 years old. And here's a copy of it. If you're interested in having a copy, feel free to write to me. Kay will put my address, which is small case JB 1717 at comcast.net, and write to me and I can send you this. There are two other poems in this series of lectures that I could send you in advance also. So I could send you like 3 pages of Lincoln poems. But here's this, I'm going to read through at least a portion of it. And Billy Has Married a Boy is the title. I will tell you a joke about Jewel and Mary. It's neither a joke nor a story. For Reuben and Charles has married two girls, but Billy has married a boy. The girlies he had tried on every side, but none could he get to agree. All was in vain. He went home again, and since that is married to Natty. So Billy and Natty agreed very well, and Mama's well pleased at the match. The egg it is laid, but Natty's afraid. The shell is so soft that it will never hatch. But Betsy, she said, you cursed bald head, my suitor you never can be. Beside your low crotch proclaims you a botch, and that never can answer for me. So that's the entirety of the poem, which I hadn't included in discussion last week about Lincoln having written such a poem. We were talking about Lincoln's, it was nearly his first action, and that was signing a bill that gave a lot of land to railroads and also federal money for every mile of track that you laid, with the value increasing depending on the severity or difficulty of laying the track. 1 mile on flat ground, the government would pay $16,000 to you, to your railroad, whoever was building it. Hilly land, they would pay you $32,000 per mile, and tunnels, $48,000 per mile. Now, the railroad track was not the only land, that area that the track was on, that was given to the railroads by the federal government. They got 10 miles on each side of the track. So north of the track, south of the track, a 20-mile stretch of land now owned by the railroad. Same east and west, if they're east and west, or a north and south track is laid, you get east and west 10 miles each direction. So this was a very healthy government contribution to the building of railroads by private industries. And the land then closest to the railroad was the most valuable land because you didn't have to haul your goods very far to get to the railroad. Consequently, that land sold by the railroads brought in a tremendous amount of money for the railroads also. Here's a chart that lists some of the land in the 6 largest states that had railroad land given to private corporations by the federal government. You can see North Dakota's ranked #1. The total acres in North Dakota are 45.2 million. And here's where I'm at right here. Railroad grants were 10.6 million. That's 23.4% of all the land in North Dakota. State of Washington, 20% of all land. Minnesota, 55.6 million acres in total, and outlines the state. 9.9 million acres given to railroads, 17.8%. And you can see other the other 3 states for the top 6. This is a very conservative estimate of the amount of land. It looks official. It's a chart, and it appears that they were given from about an eighth to a fourth of all the land within a state. But we're going to talk about a conflict with those estimates. They don't match up with the map on the next 3 pages. Total acreage in 1860 in the United States was 407 million acres. Railroad grants, which from 1862 to 1869, included 25% of all U.S. land. So there's lots of historians who contend that these places that say 22%, 10%, etc., that those are inaccurate measurements, such as you saw in the chart. Here is the map on the previous page. You can see there's a tremendous amount of land in the black color that was given to railroads. This program started after the East Coast had already done a lot of building. But you can see in the South, there's railroads. Here in the Southwest, and look on this map. Look at how much of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. Look at Michigan, and even the peninsula of Michigan. Here's a close-up of Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. On this map, railroads were given about 65% of all the land in Minnesota. In Iowa, about 80%, and here, and in Wisconsin, about 50%. A lot of it very rich, wealthy farmland that the railroads could then sell. Most historians today, and this is considered the best figure, claim 25% of all U.S. land was given to railroads. Uh, so if by the time you take into account what you see here in black, and then the fact that this entire huge area of the eastern United States has no railroad land that was given to them, uh, you end up with a figure of about 25% of all U.S. land. So it's a tremendous amount of land. This was the first major and massive contribution of the U.S. government to corporations. Are we a democracy? Becomes the question many people raise, people who don't support these contributions to corporate America. Or, as many have called it, we're a corporatocracy. Are we? Aren't we? Yeah, do corporations really run the U.S. government? Do they get lots of law passed? What kind of money do they contribute to politicians, etc.? Here are 3 books dealing with the concept of corporatocracy. You can purchase all 3 of them on Amazon or order them through a local bookstore. But here on the left is Corporatocracy, How to Protect Democracy from Dark Money and Corporate Politicians. Here's another one, Corporatocracy, same title. How CEOs and Business Roundtable hijacked the world's greatest wealth machine and how to get it back. You can see so far they're very supportive of the notion of corporatocracies and opposed to the corruption that these books contend came out of this government corporation relationship. 3rd book, Corporatocracy. Are you a corporate citizen, a slave of individual and ruthless masters? So these books all deal with corporatocracy. The bias of the books is that the United States is indeed a corporatocracy. Lincoln's birth and childhood is the next thing that we'll talk about. Nancy Hanks Lincoln was his biological mother. She died when he was a child, 9 years old. Lincoln's father remarried. More about that later. Here is a painting of Nancy Hanks. She died in 1818. Photography was not invented until late 1830s, so we have no photographs of Nancy Hanks Lincoln. And she died of milk sickness. Take a look at her face. I mean, it's a long face, not a round face or a long, elongated head, much as Lincoln had. She was of Melungeon ancestry. That means she was triracial. She had a strong European background, but also some sub-Saharan African and Native American background also, or genetically speaking. Lincoln's biological mother, her marriage. This is the home in West Virginia, Mineral County of West Virginia, where Thomas Lincoln proposed to Nancy Hanks. They were also married at this site. This is a common kind of home during the very early 1800s. This proposal of marriage took place in 1806. And you can see it's logs with material between the logs to hold them together and to keep drafts out. You can see there were windows. Also, here's a window. And on the right, there is a chimney and fireplace, kept the house warm, helped dry clothes in the winter when you could hang them near the fireplace. And a major problem with this was an open fire in a house. Frequently, the house had burned down as a result. A lot of people started building these fireplaces and chimneys out a way. They would bend it like this, backwards. So the chimney top it was actually at an angle, like heading up like so. Let's see. And then if a fire started that was out of control, they could run out and pull it down very quickly because it was already leaning quite a bit. And that would aid in getting the fire put out. That practice had not yet started here, as you can see this, and you can also see that it's not brickwork, it's all stonework. And the roof is shingled. This is Thomas Lincoln, and uh, he lived long enough for photography to have been invented. This is a photograph of him. Note that his head is kind of between elongated and round. Uh, After 12 years of marriage, Nancy Hanks Lincoln died, and Abraham was 9 years old at the time of her death. So he had many memories of his mother. He was old enough to recall that, of his biological mother. Uh, let's take a look at their children, Nancy Hanks Lincoln. The Lincolns, Nancy Hanks and Thomas Lincoln, had three children. There's a photograph of Lincoln's older sister. She was 2 years older than him. Her name is Sarah Lincoln Grigsby. She married a man named Grigsby, and she lived from 1807 to 1828. She died at the age of 20 years, and it was the result of childbirth. Then the second child is Abraham Lincoln, who lived 1809 to 1865, was murdered at the age of 56 years. And a second son, Thomas Lincoln, we're uncertain when he was born. It was 1812 or 13, and he died after just a few months. So in the Nancy Hanks Thomas Lincoln marriage, there were three children, but only two survived beyond, or I mean, only or a total of two died. Only one, Abraham, survived past the age of 20 years. Lincoln had a very famous contemporary relative, their third cousins, and that person has the same last name as his biological mother, Tom Hanks. They are about third cousins, which means you go back from Nancy Hanks to like a great grandfather, and the great grandfather had a brother, and Tom Hanks is descended from that person. So this is their Lincoln's most famous relative. There are no direct descendants. We'll talk about that later of Lincoln's. Nancy Hanks Lincoln, her death from milk sickness is our next topic. So milk sickness, this will be 9 slides in length. She died of milk sickness. Here's a picture of the milkweed plant. It lacks calcium it destroys the calcium in the milk of the cows, and it's called the snake root plant, and it was eaten by cows, and it's poisonous. So when you drink the milk, you're getting some amount of poison, depending on how much of this milkweed plant or snake root plant was consumed by the cow. Some of the symptoms, a lengthy list of symptoms. This disease killed thousands of people throughout the Midwest, in particular, where there were a lot of cattle through the 1800s, but especially in the early 1800s. You get a loss of appetite. You get pain in the abdomen, the stomach area. There's frequent vomiting of a violent nature, constipation, which means you're not having bowel movements or you can't have bowel movements, lots of thirst, tremors, people shaking like this, and an acetone breath. Acetone is an item, a liquid you can smell, and the breath has the same kind of scent as acetone does. Prostration, can't get out of bed, want to lie down all the time, just can't maneuver on two legs. So your prostate confined to bed. People are delirious. They don't know other people. They think they're seeing things that aren't there, etc. They fall into a coma and death follows. And that is what happened to Lincoln's biological mother, Nancy Hanks. Cause again, you drink milk from cows that have eaten the white snakeroot plant. And there is Ageratina altissima is the scientific name for the plant. Thomas Barbie, a medical doctor, he first described the disease in 1809. Now, what he offered was simply a description. Here's what happens to people that have this disease. And he called it the trembles because of the shaking that would occur among people. The cure for this at the time was bloodletting. That is, you would open up a vein in the person and drain out a goodly amount of blood, maybe, a couple of pints, sometimes even more, which of course did nothing to cure the person, but did a great deal to ensure their death. Here is the bloodletting tool. Here's the case for it. These items all fold into the case, and you can use either one of these three blades, either of all these blades, and you poke that into the person near where you hope a vein is, and they will begin to bleed. So doctors would carry this in a case. You could carry it in your pocket. It's not a big item. But this is what allowed for bleeding of people. One of the causes of disease believed in the 1800s up until the 1870s and later, one of the causes was bad blood. And you got to get rid of that bad blood. Let people make better blood then. The cause of the disease was discovered by a female medical doctor who lived from 1812 to 1873, and her name's Anna Pierce Hobbs Bixson. Pictured here, this is a photograph of her. She discovered the source of the disease, the white snakeroot plant, and she noted that people died of this much more frequently in the summer, almost never in the winter. So she made a seasonal connection, which made her go, it's got to be something that's going on in the summer. Cows are in a pasture. They can eat weeds, not just grass. In the winter, cows are confined to the barn and they're eating hay. So she figured out that this is something cows are eating during the summer when they're out in open pasture land. And that's why 99.9% of the people who get this disease get it during the summer months. She also wrote about sheep milk and goat milk and found it to be unaffected by the eating of the white snakeroot plant. But with cows, it was passed on through the milk. White snakeroot contains the toxin trematol. And here's the chemical formula for trematol. And that is the killing agent in the white snakeroot plant that results in the death of humans who drink the milk from cows who have eaten that plant. Here's a close-up picture of white snakeroot plant. Nice, very nice looking bloom. We have a larger image here. They grow in quite abundant little circles, and you can see that lots of leaves on there, things that cows would eat. Birth and childhood. Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln. She was Thomas Lincoln's second wife and Abraham Lincoln's stepmother. He's got a couple of kids. He wants to get remarried right away. And that's basically what happens. This is Sarah Bush Johnston. She lived from 1788 to 1869 to the age of 80 years. 1869, that's 4 years after the Lincoln assassination. She survived her stepson by 4 years. She had been married to a sheriff and had 3 children. So here you've got Thomas Lincoln with 2 children. He marries a widow who has 3 children, and they're able to combine their work and assets together and survive very well for many years as a result. She had some books. She insisted that they be moved. Excuse me, first drink. Lincoln's father didn't want to move them. They were living in Kentucky. They were going to move to Indiana. Give reasons for that move later. Lincoln's father said, geez, you got a dozen of these books. They take up a lot of space in the wagon where something else could go, like tools or something really important. But she insisted that they be moved. It's believed Thomas Lincoln could not read, and he felt these books were pretty worthless, again, taking up too much space in the wagon during the move. Abraham Lincoln took to these books that his stepmother had brought to the marriage. He especially liked Robinson Crusoe, generally carried it with him as a young man after the age of 9 years when she brought these books to the marriage. 10 of the books owned by Lincoln's stepmother: Aesop's Fables, Arabian Nights, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, again, Lincoln's favorite book, The Life of Francis Marion. Francis Marion was a military general who fought in a war before the Revolutionary War, but he was a leading military figure. Another book, Life of George Washington. She had a copy of the King James Bible, which was brand new, had just come out at the time. She had a book called Lessons in Elocution. This is how to speak, how to pronounce words. My older brother taught elocution at Brown University here, and the people that would take that class would be people wanting to go into television or radio. Uh, my brother was an actor and uh, became a radio personality in the Twin Cities, but I used to take dates when I was in high school to plays he was in around the Twin Cities, and he got noticed, was offered a contract at MGM. So he went out to live in Los Angeles and he needed a roommate. So he hung a sign on the bulletin board at MGM. For 2 years, he lived with Jack Nicholson and they stayed in touch till my brother died in 2015. He was 79 years old. Another book, lastly, is Kirkland's Grammar. So, how to use the English language at its best. Without these books, without Sarah Lincoln arguing that these books be moved, there would have been no Abraham Lincoln. He would have had no books, no reading. The move took the family to Indiana. Here on the map of the U.S., you can see Indiana's the orange state. Here is Kentucky, where they were living. So they simply moved north from Kentucky into Indiana. Now, we always think of Lincoln as being from Illinois. He did not move to Illinois till his adulthood. So Lincoln moves from Kentucky, his birthplace, with his father and stepmother to Indiana, and they lived there for 14 years. Lincoln was now 23 years old. There's a historian, Marie Fleming. She relates the following story. You can look at it. I'm going to read it to you again, just as I read the poem earlier. When he was 18 years old, Lincoln, at 6 feet 4 inches, was so tall that his head nearly touched the ceiling of the family's farmhouse kitchen. His stepmother repeatedly joked that Lincoln was so tall that he needed to keep his hair washed or he'd leave prints on her ceiling. Lincoln decided to have some fun with this idea. One day when his stepmother was not home, Lincoln got together a couple of younger boys, had them dip their bare feet in the mud outside the farmhouse kitchen. Then Lincoln took each of these boys inside, held them upside down, and had them walk their feet across the ceiling, leaving muddy footprints. When Sarah Lincoln saw the muddy footprints on her ceiling, Lincoln recalled she chuckled as she threatened to spank him. So Lincoln's now 23 years old, and the family moves to Illinois. The map in red there at the top shows Illinois. Here is a map of Illinois, and they moved to Decatur. Here's the word Decatur, and the star is where Decatur was located. I have an arrow pointing to it. Lincoln is famous for having lived in Springfield as an adult, and you can see it's in close proximity to Decatur, where his father settled. And it's on a river. This river that runs through Decatur here is the Sangamon River. And it runs across like so, east to west flow. So Sarah was supportive of Lincoln reading. She herself was a reader. Other people, neighbors, other farmers that lived near the Lincolns saw him as a lazy kid. All he does is sit around reading all the time. He should be helping in the field and doing work and so on. Uh, so anyway, it's just amazing how something like a dozen books can make a gigantic difference in the life of a person. Uh, Lincoln paid a final visit to his stepmother after he'd been elected president. The visit was in 1861. Lincoln had won the 1860 election. He was now leaving Illinois, leaving his stepmother, and going to Washington, D.C. And he went to his father's grave with her. Here is a picture of the uh, father's grave. There are so many sites that have been preserved of Lincoln memorabilia. I'll be showing you quite a number of them in small towns and all around Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois, and even down the Mississippi River into Louisiana. This was the last time that Lincoln saw his stepmother, and he stated that you made me what I am. After she had said to him, "I didn't give you life," Lincoln said, "but you made me what I am." And again, she outlived him by 4 years. Here's a photograph of her. Lived to be 80 years old, and again, outlived Lincoln by 4 years. Her birth and childhood. And we're going to talk about Thomas Lincoln, Lincoln's father. Here's a photograph of Lincoln's father. I lived from 1778 to 1851, 73 years old. Lincoln did not go to his father's funeral. The reason is they didn't get along very well. It's believed they were pretty much estranged. Lincoln didn't go into farming. His father thought that's what everybody should do. Instead, he became an attorney, and you know, he wasn't doing the kind of work that most Americans do. It's estimated probably 90% of all people were farmers at the time. Thomas Lincoln was very poor, even though he had a lot of things that he was involved with. And of course, there's lots of talk about Lincoln's humble beginnings. These are his childhood homes, Kentucky and Indiana. Here's one. It's got a fence around the house so that animals cannot come up near the house. And this one you see is more dilapidated. The roof is got some bends in it, etc. The foundation has crumbled a bit, but these places where Lincoln lived can be visited. This whole idea of rags to riches, Lincoln becomes an attorney and a very wealthy one. He's working for railroads. We'll talk about that much later. But in 1868, this whole notion of rags to riches started with the publication of the Horatio Alger book, Ragged Dick. And this Ragged Dick series went on. He wrote several books about this and how this young man who was shining shoes became a multimillionaire, and anybody in the United States can rise to that level, so on. So these stories were not popular, these rags to riches stories, when Lincoln was alive. And Lincoln didn't like people to know about his past, that he came out of the lower class farming, rural population, etc. And he didn't like nicknames. Never allowed the name Abe to be used. Yeah, although some people used it in areas when he was running for political office. On posters, they'd say Abe Lincoln, but he thought nicknames like that were just a horrible thing. Lincoln inherited the farm that his father had owned, and he maintained it then for his stepmother, who lived there after Thomas Lincoln's death. This is the house. You can see it has two entries, a couple of glass windows, and the fencing around the house. Here's an outbuilding back here, and it's 20 acres of farmland also. So his mother, Lincoln, was able to rent that out and aid in the support of his mother. Kentucky, why'd they move? Kentucky had really bad land surveying that had gotten done. There were places where it wasn't done. There were places where you couldn't see the stakes anymore that defined a body of land. There were lots of disputes in Kentucky as a result about, I own over to this. No, you don't. You own over to that. And it's one of the reasons why Thomas Lincoln got out of Kentucky was to avoid these disputes over land and land surveying. Second reason for moving was Kentucky was a slave state, and Thomas Lincoln wanted to live in a free state. He was anti-slavery. So here's Kentucky, and you can see all they had to do was move north into Indiana there. And everything in green here was a slave state. Everything in pink, this is 1854, everything in pink here and California were not slave states. They were free states. You can see the total amount of land in slave states is greater than the total amount of land in free states. So reason for the move, poor land surveying in Kentucky, and Indiana had much better land surveying, and they were a free state, not a slave state. Thomas Lincoln occupations, there's a total of 5 of these things that he did. So he was a person of diversity. First is farming. And he acquired lots of land, not just the 20 acres that he lived on, which he could farm himself, but other acreages where he could then sell the land, make it look a little better, etc. People coming into Indiana would want land, and he'd say, I've got some for sale. So he was set up farmlands for other people, sell it to them. It's also real estate development. Now, the farms that he set up sound like real estate development, but here we mean the bigger issue of he created towns also. So some of the area that he bought, he'd put up 3 buildings, and one was a stable for horses, and one was a place to eat, one was a general store, place to eat and drink, actually. So he'd set up townships, which would give people a place where they could buy goods that had been shipped into the area. Third, he was a carpenter. Much of his work remains. He built cabinets. This is a Thomas Lincoln cabinet here. You can see it has 2 tall drawers on the top and 2 smaller drawers on the bottom. Here's a close-up of another cabinet, and you can see he did design work here and over here on the door, here on the side rail. And so he was a carpenter, cabinet maker. He was also an appraiser. He would assess land for people, tell them what it was worth. You have too many hills on this land, makes farming difficult, that decreases the value. You have a wonderful, large, flat area, etc. And number 5, He was a policeman. He was a part of the patrols in the Indiana area, served as county enforcer of laws, maintainer of the peace. And here's a picture of white men surrounding a black man that lived in their area. Uh, there was more arrests for blacks, and that has not changed. There are multiples more convictions of black people than they are members of the population. Lincoln's childhood family religion. They were very conservative Baptists. No alcohol. So this is Lincoln's father, and then his mother and stepmother also went along with all of this. So there was no alcohol in the Lincoln home when he was a child. And the reason many Christian communities were opposed to alcohol is they saw that the excessive use of it led to lots of difficulties within families, the destruction of property, people not working as they should. And so alcohol was banned as a religious topic by religious people. Really nothing to do with the Bible, where there's stories of Christ turning water into wine, but it had a great deal to do with the difficult social situations that were created by the overuse of alcohol. They prohibited dancing, very embarrassing. Man and a woman standing neck close together and in public. So dancing was banned among the conservative Baptists that the Lincolns believed in. Shocking. They were anti-slavery, violation of the treatment of people. They wanted slavery ended. They wanted emancipation for blacks. So this was really a social justice part of what these very conservative Baptists believed at the time, that the Lincoln family were part of that religious group. Earliest known relative of Abraham Lincoln was Samuel Lincoln, and he came from England. Here is England all in white. This is Wales here. This is Scotland up here. So Lincoln's ancestry comes out of England, and Samuel Lincoln came to North America from England in 1638. So, hardly 20 years after, or 20 to 30 years after the arrival of the first Europeans, at least the ones that maintained settlement. The Vikings were here in the late 900s and set up communities. There are Viking longhouses along the Canadian coast across from Greenland, and so they were here and settled, but not permanently. In the early 1000, from like 1002 to 1017, there was a community maintained at Lando Meadows, Newfoundland. And there was Brendan the monk in the 600s, and he went sailing, and he headed north out of Ireland. And he came to a very large land area that had vineyards growing, vine growing, right down to the seashore. He called it Vinland, or the Vikings called it Vinland because of that. But he describes in his book, Brendan the monk did, that he had seen a land where there was growth all the way down to the ocean. And so he actually was the first person of European ancestry to see the American East Coast area. The little's known about Lincoln's mother's background. Education of Lincoln. He was self-educated. There's a story that he wrote on the back of a shovel using charcoal. That's how he learned to write. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but it's an interesting story. He apprenticed in a law office, so he did not have to go to a college in order to become an attorney. As a matter of fact, but virtually all attorneys at this time would simply walk into a law office and say they'd like to work there. They'd work there for nothing or for food only or lodging only, and they'd spend many months with the lawyer and finally could become lawyers themselves. And that's what Lincoln did. He apprenticed in a law office. He did not attend a law school. So he was self-educated. His stepmother, pictured here, was very important in Lincoln's education. She had the books. She probably did a great deal to get him reading, teaching him how to read, how to write, etc. There were also traveling teachers, and these teachers would go from community to community, from farmhouse to farmhouse. Uh, they would stop at family homes. They might spend a few hours there with the children, giving them some very basic education. They might spend a few days, put me up, uh, make me a bed, feed me, and after 5 days they'd leave and were able to do uh, quite a bit more than they could in just an afternoon with the children at that farm area. Uh, these people, these traveling teachers, would mostly teach reading. They did not teach writing. Now, eventually, here in this picture, you can see there were schools, and the schools in rural areas. And note that there are a lot of girls in this photograph. This education frequently was not for boys alone. Um, Here is a teacher being interviewed. You can see there's a couple of the interviewers are seated. Uh, the woman is standing on a rug, answering questions, not looking at the men. And Thomas Jefferson said, all the parcels of land that get set aside, 1/16 of them have to be set aside for educational institutions. Now, Jefferson said that in the late 1700s and enforced it. But that doesn't mean schools were built there, especially in rural areas. So by the time we get to Lincoln's adulthood, we're seeing more and more schools with teachers hired to stay and work there and be salaried. So these traveling teachers, it's believed Lincoln had contact with them mostly through the mid-teen years, like 14 to 18 or so. It's estimated that he may have had as much as 1 year of education with traveling teachers. But that's all guesswork. Young work family, farming. Lincoln started doing farm chores. It was his first job. He worked on these acreages that were owned by his father. He would uh, deal with lumber, meaning he would make fence work, such as you see in the background here, or he could make rails. But the rails we're talking about aren't railroad, they're this fence work that moves along here. Uh, and this is the famous image of Lincoln, as a young man doing fence building and chopping logs, etc. Worked for other farmers. They would pay him money, but his father said, "You have to give me that money." So Lincoln, as late teens, early 20s person, was working for other farmers and then having to give the money to his father. Uh, Labor was in high demand, and the reason was his height and his strength. They'd look at a guy like that and they go, I could hire somebody who's 5'4" or 5'6", but what kind of work can they do in the course of a day? This guy's tall and looks like a person of substance, so I'll get a lot of work out of this guy. So Lincoln got lots of attention and was pulled into lots of uh, farm work because of this height. Um, now, this is not a picture of Lincoln as a young man, of course. He's in his early 50s here. It's during the Civil War. But it's a great picture of Lincoln with a bunch of Civil War Northern military officers. And you can see that he's much taller than anyone else in the photo, even if you took that top hat off of him. So, in Indiana, Lincoln won a county wrestling championship. And when the Wrestling Hall of Fame learned of this, they inducted him. So you can go to the Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I don't know what city it's in, but there will be Lincoln as one of their great wrestling champions. So, young work life, moved to Illinois, and a trade trip. We'll describe what that is. The family moves to Illinois, and this is because in Indiana, there'd been an outbreak of milk sickness, and it had killed in Kentucky Lincoln's biological mother. So his dad said, we want to get away from this. They moved out of Indiana and over into Illinois, where milk sickness, there was not an outbreak of it there. And you can see here modern picture of a woman with a glass of milk and she's holding her stomach. Remember, abdominal pain was a symptom of milk sickness. Now, Lincoln's living on a river in Illinois. So, with a friend or possibly a group of friends, they took a bunch of supplies and a bunch of animals down the Mississippi River all the way to New Orleans, and then sold off the goods that they had. So this was a single trip, but it was very important in the life of Lincoln. Here's a picture of Lincoln on that trip. It's a painting, not a photograph, of course. And you can see Lincoln standing on top of a flat boat. Now, a flat boat means, it doesn't mean the deck is flat. It means the underneath is flat. It's not like this. It doesn't come to a point. The reason you want a flat bottom on a boat is you can sail it through much shallower water than if you've got a huge amount of the boat sunk below the water level. The Vikings used flat boats. It's why they were able to navigate the ocean and then come to a river, and they could go 100 miles up the river, which is much shallower than the ocean, and they could conquer cities very far inland, was because they had flat bottomed boats. Here's a poster, plaque in a town of Rockport that talks about Lincoln being there. Lincoln saw slavery on this trip down the Mississippi River for the first time in his life. And I'm going to read the plaque here. Marking Old Lower Landing, where in 1828, age 19, Abraham Lincoln, with Allen Gentry, made his first flatboat trip to New Orleans. He saw slaves, sold, and said, if I ever get a chance to hit that thing, I'll hit it hard. In every real sense of the word, it might be said that the Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln issued in 1863, owes its origin to this flatboat trip. Young work life, general stores. In New Salem, Illinois, and New Salem's located in that county that is outlined in red here. Here's the Wabash River on the east side of Illinois. On the south down here, that's the Ohio River. And this entire west side of Illinois is the Mississippi River. And Lincoln lived in New Salem. Now, here is an outline of just this middle portion of Illinois. And you can see New Salem is very close to the Mississippi River there where that star is. And in New Salem, Lincoln worked in the general store for 2 years, 1831 to 1832, or less than 2 years. During the period of time that he was an employee in a general store, the Black Hawk War started, was in progress. This is Chief Black Hawk, who led the war. Makataimi Shikia Keaki was his Indian name, but the white folks called him Black Hawk. And this was a war that was fought in Illinois, where Lincoln was living, and in Michigan. And these were Sauk Native Americans, S-A-U-K, or at least that's what the French probably named them that. That wasn't the name they used for themselves. Lincoln joined the Army for the Black Hawk War. Here's a drawing showing Lincoln standing under a tree and talking to other soldiers. He was a captain, so he was an officer in the Black Hawk War, but he never saw any combat. He was part of the death squad. After 2 of the battles during the Black Hawk War, he and his group of men buried the dead. At the war's end, Lincoln comes back, and he has this experience of working in a general store. So he decides to set one up, own it himself. So he buys a general store here. He's 24 years old now. And he gets a partner named William Berry. And here is a picture of that general store. You can visit it today. Here's a sign, the Berry Lincoln General Store. and it's located in New Salem, Illinois. There's another picture of it. You can see it has an entrance here, some back buildings. This is a well. That's how you'd get the water and so on. So this was Lincoln's General Store in New Salem, Illinois. Barry, his partner, wanted to sell alcohol. Licenses cost $7 each. In 2023, that's about a $256,000 license by inflation. So this $7 was a considerable amount of money. But both Barry and Lincoln bought a license. They also added a tavern where you didn't just come in, buy the liquor, and take it home. You come in, sit down, and they serve it to you by the glass. And it was a restaurant also. So now it's a general store and a restaurant that sells liquor and food. Well, Lincoln's partner, Barry, became an alcoholic. He was drinking up a lot of the supplies they had. Lincoln then said, I'm getting out of this. He sold his half interest to somebody and left his partner, Barry, behind. Barry died in 1835. He was 24 years old. Here's the burial tombstone for William Barry. Died January 10th, 1835. In the 1830s, a pint of alcohol cost 12 cents and a quart of alcohol cost 24 cents. It would come in barrels and then be distributed. You'd fill a bottle people would bring into your store. You could provide them with a bottle also if they didn't have one. In 1823, that 24 cents is $8.80 a quart. But what's a quart of liquor cost today? $15 to $25. So by inflation, we're paying 2 to 3 times more for a quart of alcohol than people paid in the 1830s. Illinois politics. Well, he owned a general store, and this was just after the Black Hawk War was over. He ran for a position in the Illinois legislature in their General Assembly. This is a painting of the Illinois Capitol building during that period of time. There were 4 open positions and 17 people running for them. The top 4 would win. Lincoln placed 8th, so he lost the election, was unable to get elected to his first hoped-for position of an assemblyman in the Illinois state legislature. During one of Lincoln's speeches, people started, opponents of Lincoln started harassing one of his supporters, and they pushed the guy to the ground. Lincoln stepped in and told him to back off and threw the attacker to the ground. And, he was tall, strong, etc. So there was we think there's a lot of arguing in politics today, doesn't that? That certainly was a difficult situation. Lincoln's major issue during this campaign that involved 17 people with only 4 positions being open was to improve navigation along the Sangamon River. This is the Sangamon River, and you can see Decatur, where the Lincoln family moved when they got out of Indiana due to the milk sickness. This is where they moved, right on the Sangamon River. And later in life, Lincoln lived in Springfield, also on the Sangamon River. And that was his major talking point during his campaign was, we've got to do things that make this river navigable so that we can get more goods into the towns that are growing along the river. Lincoln's three major problems in the election was he didn't have a formal education. People thought it was real important for their politicians to be well educated. So that was a concern for many people in the election and a reason they did not vote for Lincoln. Also, he had no friends in high places. This could give him contributions that would make it easier for him to travel around in Illinois and gain some votes. Uh, also, it was lots of voters believe, hey, you ought to be somebody before you become a politician. So consequently, with no friends in high places, Lincoln had virtually no money that he could spend, no support from wealthy people. The wealthy people wanted to see people from their class elected to these positions. They were the people that the wealthy aided the most, was their fellow wealthy. A lot of people say this is a present day need also to have friends in high places that speak well of you. We see this in political ads today. See a lot of people that are saying one thing or another. You've got Clinton and Obama campaigning for Harris and Walz this year, for instance. And third, he had little money. He was a common laborer. He'd owned a store, but he had to have a bank loan to buy the store and pay for it. So that's against him. Half of all Congress members today in 2024 are millionaires. Let's take a look at the top 10 people in Congress. Top three are Republicans, the next four are Democrats, and seven or eight, nine, and 10 are Republicans. Look here, Dean Phillips of Minnesota. I had no idea. It's worth about $130 million. The richest person in Congress is a Republican from Montana, Giannaforte, and he's worth about 180 million dollars, something like that. But again, half of all Congress people, that includes representatives and senators, a total of 535 people, half of them are millionaires. After the election and his loss, he got two jobs in the county, Pike County, where he was living, and they were the postmaster and a surveyor. So he would survey areas in Pike County, and he would also distribute the mail and send out letters for people. Lincoln romances. Oh, are there a lot of questions? Should we stop here or can we?
I think you're good to go ahead and cover romances if it's not too much.
We should do what?
If you want, you can go ahead and cover romances if it's not too long.
Okay, yeah, let's what well, we can do the intro part anyway.
Okay.
Anne Rutledge. This was a romance that was alleged may have never happened. She died at age 22. It's believed she had typhoid fever. A lot of people said no, they were just friends, but they were in the same area together. Her family founded New Salem, Illinois. Let's start down here. Today you can tour New Salem, Illinois. Here's the first Barry Lincoln store here. Then we go up here to the top. This is the second Barry Lincoln store. So they had two different buildings when they were working together. Here is the Herndon Brothers Law Office. This was Lincoln's, uh, Lincoln worked for the Herndons. And the founders of the city were the Rutledge family, and Lincoln is assumed to have been dating a daughter of that family. After her death, the story is that Lincoln considered suicide. He possibly wrote a poem called Suicide's Lament, and the poem was published in lots of newspapers around the area. Here it is. It's a lengthy poem. If you're interested in seeing it, please write to me. I'll send you the poems that are here. But it's called The Suicide Soliloquy by Lincoln. And Joshua Speed, who was a friend of Lincoln and one of his law partners, wrote that Lincoln wrote this poem. He attributed it to Lincoln. But in Lincoln's own handwriting, there's no such poem has ever been found, so we don't know. And here's a sample of Lincoln's handwriting. Abraham Lincoln, his hand and pen. He will be uh, he will be good, but God knows when. So no such, this poem does not exist in Lincoln's handwriting. Mary Owens was a second romance of Lincoln's. They began dating several months after the death of Anne Rutledge. After about a year, they drifted apart. Lincoln wrote her a letter saying, "Hey, are we still interested in each other?" But she never wrote back to him. The family kept the letter. Here's a copy of it. And that's a letter from Lincoln. Uh, Mary Todd, this eventually became his wife. About
So
2 years.
just JB, can we then maybe hold off on Mary Todd since she's the main till
Oh,
next week?
okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Let's
okay.
let's see. I'm gonna quit this and yeah, okay. Whoop. Hello. Oh, now let's see.
You
Oh,
just quit your camera. You can open it.
my camera went off accidentally. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. So that was just kind of, we got the first two out of the way that weren't
Yeah.
as important as what Mary is going to be. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the beginning of our lecture with a question on the railroads. If the railroads got so much land and money per mile from the government, why did so many go bankrupt?
There was a depression, and I'm going to talk about that.
So that'll come up.
But that depression came in the 1870s under Grant,
Okay.
and I think there were about 360 railroads, and 90, a fourth of them failed. Uh,
Okay.
so the government was not bailing them out, but it was due to a horrible decline in the economics of that time. But they
Okay.
gained, there's also, I'll show the amount of money that, I mean, there were railroads that built $60 million worth of railroad lines and then billed the government twice that amount that they had actually spent
Okay.
under this bill that Lincoln passed as soon as he became president.
Okay. So another question. If Nancy Hanks died from milk sickness, how did the children survive? You would assume that they all drank the same milk.
Yeah. Well, we don't know. She may have drank a lot more of it. She was working. Uh, the children may have gotten milk from a variety of different places.
Okay.
they'd visit a friend's house down the road or something. But some people survive diseases, others don't.
Okay.
But I really don't know why it was her and not her husband, and not at the time that she died, there were still two children of their three children alive. But
Okay.
everybody doesn't die during an epidemic.
Okay. So someone's asking, did you think the family moving from a slave state to a free state affected Lincoln's actions as president?
Um, well, more than anything, historians argue that it was this trip to New Orleans.
Okay.
And when he actually saw slave sales, although that had been a family value.
Okay.
However, when Lincoln starts fighting the Civil War, he says the major thing we need to accomplish is the restoration of the Union. He did not think slavery, the abolition of slavery, was the major thing. And the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery. It freed slaves in areas still under the control of the Confederacy. Slavery still existed in areas that had been conquered by the North. So Lincoln was really pushing for restoration of the Union. Once the war, once he realized the war was being won, then he started talking about total elimination of slavery.
Okay. See a couple comments on the points that were made earlier. Someone thinks Lincoln and Tom Hanks are actually third cousins 4 times removed.
Yeah.
So you have to know how that all works.
Yeah, you can look up charts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I have a cousin. My cousin has a daughter. A lot of people go, well, that's your second cousin. No, it isn't.
No,
It's my first cousin once removed. So
right.
you really need to look all this stuff up on
So it's just like Lincoln's third cousin, 4 generations later, in that third cousin's line is Tom Hanks.
yeah,
So he's removed by so many generations. Okay.
yes.
Let's see. Also, someone was pointing out, I kind of missed this part saying King James Bible was not new in the time of Lincoln. It came out in 1611. Maybe it was just a new copy. I don't know.
I got that wrong. Yeah,
Okay.
it was it was 200 years old. It didn't come out in 1811. It came out in 1611. Yeah.
But yes, her copy might have been much newer of the King James Version.
That is
Okay.
correct. Thanks for the correction. I got it wrong.
Okay. Um, with his interest in internal improvements, I imagine early Lincoln, was he a Whig? Or what other parties were important in Illinois at that time?
Well, uh, in the during the Civil War in the North, transportation was much better than in the South, and so Lincoln was much aware of making transportation a better item that could happen maybe after the South was conquered, and when Reconstruction stopped, in 1876, you know, Grant had been president for 8 years. He was a real strong fighter, anti-slavery person, set up institutions where blacks could be educated, etc. Then in the 1876 election, the Republican Party made a deal with Southern states who had voted against their candidate and got them to vote for the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes. known as Rutherford B. Hayes, because the Republican Party said, "Hey, if you say that your electoral votes go to our candidate, we'll build railroads in the South," because they didn't have much. Well, that never happened. But some other things did happen. We'll leave you folks alone. You can pass your own laws, states' rights stuff. And
Right, but with Lincoln running to be an assemblyman, did he necessarily have a political party at that point, or
no.
no? Okay.
Well, he didn't have the Republican Party. He was a Whig.
He
W.
was awake. Okay.
And it was the first half of the 1800s. It was the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. Then
Okay.
in 1854 in Wisconsin, the
That's
Republican
what.
Party was founded.
Okay.
And the Whigs really went to that Republican Party uh, quite rapidly. And just 6 years after its founding, it elected a president, Lincoln.
Okay. Um, Now, did Lincoln's stepmother teach him to read, or the
Uh,
traveling teachers?
well, we don't know.
We don't know.
uh, but yeah, I would certainly guess that yes, she did.
Hmm.
She had the books. He had an interest in them. She probably started reading them to him and then teaching him how to read. And then traveling teachers advanced all of that education, which mostly was about reading and writing
Hmm.
being taught. So,
So, okay. Someone's pointing out that millionaire politicians, while many can get rich from political favors, a lot of elected ones were rich before getting elected. And I'd say that's more so you have to have money to run.
yeah, yeah. Uh, I saw the other day that Kamala Harris has raised $1 billion. I
So,
mean, this is a job that pays $400,000 a year, and you got $1 billion running for it. How many? It would be interesting to see how much of that money came in large sums, how much was $10 donations, and
okay. Just going to mention if people didn't see over in chat, I had posted the link to the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, which is in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So you can just
oh,
look that up, and
good, thanks.
it's out of Stillwater.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe I'll add that as a slide and get a picture of the place. And
so okay, but otherwise we're just coming up on 2 o'clock, and want to thank everyone for taking your time out of your day to join us here. Want to thank you, JB, for all you shared with us. Thank Grayson from OLLI for helping us with all of the technical parts of this and being the one who gets those videos up on YouTube for us. So, otherwise, everyone, have a wonderful day. Enjoy the sunshine, and we will see you next week.
thank you.